When we pray and we hear something back in here somewhere, is that really God? Or is that just something in our imagination? Have you ever wondered about that? I certainly have. And recently I've come into an understanding of this whole concept. Come on, let's dig into the soil of this together. Welcome to you, my friend. I am D. Grant Smith, the growth farmer for personal development through the lens of spirituality and storytelling. Here on this channel, we talk about the journey of becoming the best version of ourselves, which means living our dreams, self-love, healing, transformation, manifestation, and a whole lot more. If you want more from me, including some awesome and inspiring stories, fiction novels, and lessons, and really cool stuff that will bless your life, I encourage you to join me and visit growthfarming.com. So today we are going to talk about imagination and our connection with God. In particular, how we can effectively communicate with God through our imagination, and why this incredibly simple practice is actually a key to harmonizing with the divine. Now, let me ask you this question. Have you ever felt confused about the idea, the concept, and the practice of prayer? Unsure if your requests and your conversations with God are actually heard and received? Hey, I certainly have. For many of us, especially those of us who come from very staunchly religious backgrounds, the idea of actually talking with God and hearing something in response can seem like a fictional tale because God only talks to certain people, special people, or so many religious teachers and leaders have told us for a really long time. But what if all of that's just a bunch of baloney? What if God has given us not only the power, but the capacity to commune and communicate directly with the divine, to know ourselves more fully, and to experience life the way we desire? And what if the easiest, most fun, and best tool for having connected communication with God is through our imagination? I actually first heard Neville Goddard teach about God being in our imagination, or more specifically, he teaches that God is our imagination. And really, when I first read that, I found it really hard to believe because it flew in the face of everything I had learned in church for decades. Also, because imagination is what we used as kids to play and imagine things that weren't real. But the capacity to make the unseen seen, like I've talked about in previous videos, including the one about Peter Pan and imagination, that's something definitely worth checking out. Also, the capacity to make the unseen seen and to make all things new, which is what love does. From our ability to access the part of us that is both divine and love and unencumbered by anything in the external world. And that capacity lies where? Inside our imagination. Recently, I've returned to reading Neale Donald Walsch's seminal book, Conversations with God. It's incredible, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. So much of what transpires in Neale's discussions with God about a variety of topics from relationships to work and career, happiness, dreams come true, and a whole bunch of other stuff reflects the dialogue that I've had with the divine. And while I used the question whether I was making up this conversation in my mind, whether or not any of it was real, I now see that God is very much active in our imagination if we'll allow ourselves to fully access it. Neale asks this question in the first chapter of the book. He says, how can I know that this communication is from God? How do I know that this isn't just my own imagination? Check out what God's response is. Response is very beautiful. In the book, this is what God says. What would be the difference? Do you not see that I could just as easily work through your imagination as anything else? You will know these words are from me because you, of your own accord, have never spoken so clearly. Hey, I don't know about you, but when I have conversations with God, that's been my experience too. What about you? Has that been your experience? Comment below and let me know if that's been your experience too. When I get still, and when I get quiet in dialogue with God, asking questions that are too big for my mind to comprehend or figure out, the clarity comes back to me in a way that is something my own mind couldn't make up. And it all happens in the part of my mind that I considered for a long time to just be fairy tale land, the world of imagination. I find it really powerful to see how these two amazing spiritual teachers, Neale Donald Walsch and Neville Goddard, are teaching basically the same thing, using different words and different methods, but having the same powerful end result. Our imaginations have no limits. They have no restrictions. There's nothing that can't be done in the imagination. And isn't that true about the nature of God, to whom all things are possible and from whom all things have been made that is made? Later in the first chapter of Conversations with God, the divine speaks about how each of us have been given the same capacity to create, which means we're all creators. Communication with God is an act of creation. We all have the capacity to create, not just so-called creative people. We can create peace and harmony. We can also create chaos and disharmony. It's a matter of not only using our imagination, but having what Neville Goddard calls a controlled imagination. What Neville says is this: the great secret is a controlled imagination and a well-sustained attention, firmly and repeatedly focused on the object to be accomplished. That's found in chapter 5 of his book, The Power of Awareness. We can easily let our imaginations run wild and conjure up all sorts of things that we don't want to experience. If we have been conditioned, and many of us have, into a belief system that says that God is always upset or mad at us for not doing things perfectly, it's easy for our imaginations to take off into hearing something that God is not at all. But actually, that's not God. That's more of our ego. The ego seeks to control and manipulate. It also operates more from fear than love because that's its main function, to survive. And survival is really about dealing with fear. And here is where the great battle of our consciousness actually resides. If you've read the Bible in James chapter 1 verse 8 says, "A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways." One reason many of us question whether or not we have ever heard from God in our imaginations or some other voice/entity is because of the double-mindedness that we tend to struggle with. And one way to discern what we are actually hearing is to gauge its clarity. Or as God tells Neale in Conversations with God, mine is always your highest thought, your clearest word, your grandest feeling. Anything less is from another source. But how do we know what our highest thought is? Again, the divine brings us clarity. Going back to Conversations with God in chapter 1, it says this: the highest thought is always that which contains joy. The clearest words are those which contain truth. The grandest feeling is that feeling which you call love. Joy, truth, love. These three are interchangeable, and always one leads to another. It matters not in which order they are placed. Think about that for a minute. Joy, truth, and love. That's the clearest words. That's the highest thought. And when we experience this, we know for sure that we're listening to God. What can we take away from this to have clear and effective communication with God? Now, while it's easy for us to let our imaginations run wild with rampant thoughts, especially when we're feeling anxious or stressed, take the time to clear our minds and get into a place of stillness that allows us to access the highest thought. Also recognize that prayer and asking for something are not the same thing. Though many of us, myself included, have been taught that to pray is to ask for what you want, yet even the Bible tells a different story. Mark 11:24 says, "Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." Again, we use the power of imagination to see, feel, taste, touch, and experience what we want in our consciousness to bring it into tangible form. And this is the real act of creation. The universe, God, gives us what we are, not what we want. I talk about that in another video that I will link down below. To approach God from a place of lack is a request to experience more lack. The correct prayer is therefore never a prayer of supplication, but a prayer of gratitude. The key for us to have effective communication with God is to seek our highest thought and to approach the divine from a place of gratitude. Faith comes into play because much of what we desire is not what is necessarily right in front of us at the moment, which is why our imaginations are the best tools for bringing this into being. It's the ultimate creative function and ability. And each of us have been given imagination to use not only as tools for creation, but for our communication and our connection with God itself. What do you think? Comment below and tell me about your thoughts about imagination being the gateway to effective and clear communication with God. Hey, I appreciate you for watching this video. If you haven't done so already, give this video a like and subscribe. It helps me be able to serve more people and grow more love in the world. And if you want more from me, I invite you to join me at growthfarming.com, where you will experience some amazing, awesome, inspiring, educational, enlightening, and entertaining stories and novels, as well as some deep dive spiritual and personal growth lessons, courses, community, coaching, and a whole lot more. Once again, at growthfarming.com. Hey, I love you. I believe in you. I appreciate you. And I'll see you again soon.